Okay, so the House Committee on Federalism and States' Rights have now come to order. Madam Secretary, will you please note the attendance? So today we have two bills to consider. We have House Concurrent Resolution 2010 and House Concurrent Resolution 2014. The bulk of the speakers are going to be on 2010, and they're here now, so we are going to go ahead and hear that bill first. And then we have 2014, I believe, has two people signed in to speak, and one if necessary. So we will go second with that one. And with that, Mr. Vice Chairman, can you please move the bill?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move that HB 2010 be returned with a due pass recommendation.
It's HCR 2010.
I move that HCR, House Concurrent Resolution 210, be moved with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And Jonathan.
Madam Chairman, members of this committee, for the record, my name is John Oyas. I am the Legislative Research Intern for the Federalism and States' Rights Committee. HCR 2010 urges Congress to call for an Article 5 Convention of the States to adopt amendments to the United States Constitution that impose fiscal restraints, limit power and jurisdiction to the federal government, and limit terms of office for officials and members of Congress. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Members, any questions? Thank you, John. Okay, Mr. Vice Chair.
First person to come forward to give testimony will be Mr. Mike Kapik. Step forward, sir, to the podium. Identify yourself for the record. And all speakers will be given a liberal 2 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair, representatives. A recent Gallup poll has shown that nearly 70% of Americans believe that big government is a bigger threat to us than is big business or big labor. Americans of both parties despise the federal government, hence Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Americans on both sides are fed up with the status quo. Term limits were not intended in the original Constitution because it was assumed that by our founders, the framers of the Constitution, that the folks would go home. They never envisioned a government the size and complexity of the one that we have today. The Supreme Court has also moved to change 7,500 words of our Constitution into 9,000 pages of interpretation, including rewriting of laws. Both parties, congressional and executive, have liberally spent our money into $19 trillion of debt. The alphabet agencies have written their own rules, do their own punishing, and we can't stop them, and neither can Congress. Something is broken that we have to fix. Who decides? Do the elite political class, bureaucrats, lobbyists on that dim lit hill, or do we, the people, make the decisions? The fifth of 7 articles of the Constitution show us how this can be fixed. With resolve, it must be you and the other states. It will take wisdom, strength, and courage to stand up for the people. Some fear an amending convention, even knowing that previous non-amending conventions were successful, never a runaway. The resolution, HCR 2010, has an added paragraph that voids the entire process if anything other than what is specified therein is adopted. That means it is impossible to have a runaway convention. It cannot occur. And finally, I would like to, as to the rules of the convention itself, I'd like to submit for the record proposed rules presented by or prepared by constitutional scholar Robert Nadelson. 200 plus legislators in 40 states are currently working on these rules and redefining and for the convention itself. You are the last bastion. Only you can save America and the DC overreach and return the power and sovereignty to Arizona and to the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kapik. Members, any questions for Mr. Kapik? Yes, Representative Thorpe.
Madam Chairman and Mike, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation. You actually said these words a moment ago. The first three words of our Constitution. If you can repeat those.
We the people.
Absolutely. And so George Mason was one of the framers of our Constitution that was vehemently argued in favor of a couple things. He wanted a Bill of Rights. And aren't we glad that we have a Bill of Rights? He also wanted the tradition that actually started in England in the 16th century in English legal documents to give the people in the states the ability to modify the Constitution when it needed to be modified. And so he, among others, George Washington, goodness, even up to Ronald Reagan and other of our leaders have supported the states and the people within those states being able to check an unruly federal government.
Yes, that's absolutely true. The convention process goes back 300 years and has a history. There were 36 of them, and not a single one of them was a runaway convention. They were not a legislative body. They were an assembly called by communities, colonies, and then afterwards states for the purpose of resolving an issue. Once the resolution of the issue was proposed, it was sent out to the various communities for approval, and the convention itself broke up and went home. Mm-hmm. They were done until the next convention. And it was not uncommon for these to occur every 3 or 4 years, which is the reason why we don't, and as years went on, they became less frequent. So the framers, when they wrote the Constitution, knew how they worked, so they didn't put them into Article 5.
And Madam Chair, and that brings up a great point, that we have a rich convention history that people don't realize that up to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, we'd already had 14 conventions of the states that had met successfully. And I think the most interesting one, there are people that are concerned of a runaway convention, and yet the most interesting of our conventions occurred in 1862. And it was called by Virginia trying to keep the Civil War from occurring. And they met for 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a convention for proposing amendments, but they did provide Congress with a proposal for a new amendment, and Congress chose not to actually take their recommendation. And there are scholars that believe that if Congress had followed through with that, we could have avoided the Civil War. And so if you're going to have a runaway convention, it would have happened in 1862 when you think about the North and the South, at each other's throats. So I truly appreciate you coming forward and supporting this bill.
Thank you, Representative Thorpe. Members, any other questions? Representative Fincham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, sir, for bringing this forward. Just more of a comment than a question. I want to make sure that we have a clarity of mind that we're not talking about a constitutional convention. We're talking about a convention of the states, something that is very different. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Fincham. Members, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Kapik.
Would Mr. Tom Sinyard please come forward? Sir, identify yourself at the podium, and you'll be given a liberal 2 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Sinyard. It's Sinyard. I've been fortunate enough to be a citizen of Arizona since about 1992, and I'm a very concerned citizen. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and I'm not a historian, but I'm a very concerned citizen. Article 5 gives us the right to address overreach by the federal government. And this was given to us by our founding fathers, and it appears to me that they had amazing oversight because, in my view, we're already there. We're about to lose our republic. As citizens, we have the responsibility to act. I think the question is, do we have the courage to do so? It's argued by opponents of our Convention of States that this might be appropriate sometime in the future, just not now. And my question is, if not now, when? Seems to me it's getting awfully obvious where we are. So like you, I'm seriously concerned about the track that we're on. And Miss Powell, one of our ladies that was around during the founding of our republic, asked Ben Franklin, "What have you given us?" in her question about the Constitution. Ben Franklin answered, "A republic if you can keep it." Can we keep it? Article 5 gives us the method to address that problem. And my thought is that it's our responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony today. I myself, and I think that there's probably other people in this room, feel that our Constitution was inspired by God. And so I guess I'm troubled with people that would then say we shouldn't use Article 5. So that would beg the question, is our Constitution inspired by God except for Article 5? And if Article 5 should not be used, then what other parts of our Constitution should we also ignore? I truly believe our founders, they hoped that America was set on a good foundation and would continue forward, but they also knew that the day might come when we had an out of control and unruly federal government, and the states needed to put into check that federal government. So Article 5 is the tool that they gave to us. And I agree with you. You know, there's people that argue that all we need to do is elect good people, and we'll be able to solve the problem. Well, that certainly hasn't worked out, has it?
It hasn't worked out, and it's not going to work out, and we don't have enough time to wait for it to work out.
Madam Chair, and I agree with you. And during this time, you know, you think about the Reagan period. I think during Reagan, we were right about $1 trillion in debt, and now we're approaching $19 trillion in debt that we're leaving for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, their great-grandchildren probably. We're destroying our nation. And so if we're given a fire hose, if we're not going to use it, then we need to just sit back and watch our nation burn.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to, you mentioned something, Tom, earlier about not being a historian but being concerned. And I think it's important that we recognize that the last several generations going through the education system missed quite a bit of our history. And I myself have had to go back and fill that in. And as I've learned, one of the things I learned this year, we went back east in Thanksgiving time and did a Thanksgiving tour on the back east, and one of the main destination was George Mason's house to kind of make a pilgrimage to the man who gave us Part B of Article 5. And I knew that part. I knew that he could foresee that someday the federal government would grow so large that they would not rein themselves in, and so the people, the states, ought to be able to rein themselves in. And through an Article 5 process, I call it Part B of Article 5, through the states. And having gone back this fall, I learned that George Washington actually, and I say he unfriended him, George Washington unfriended George Mason when he would not vote for the Constitution as in the original form, that he demanded that there be a Bill of Rights. And so it was 2 years later when that Bill of Rights came, championed by Madison, right? Because George Mason had had enough and went home. He had health issues. He said, "That's it. I washed my hands of this." He goes home and just dismayed that he couldn't get the Bill of Rights. But it was what I learned when going back to his home. They taught us that it was the people of Virginia who had really believed in the was it the Declaration of Liberties in the Virginia Constitution that were the basis of the Bill of Rights. And so they demanded, not necessarily George Mason, but the people of Virginia demanded and basically pushed Madison into saying we do need to put these Bill of Rights in. So even in the beginning, George Washington was, I don't want to say oppressing, but pushing back against a Bill of Rights. And it was the people back then that said, no, we have these rights and we want them established in the Constitution. So George Mason really was a visionary. And he asked us that when the day comes, will the states and will the people rise up and push back like they did back in 1788, 89, and say, we want this. Well, here we are again. What he saw in the future would happen, we are now here. And the question is like you said, Representative Thorpe, if you believe in the Constitution, then you must believe in all of it. And so here is the tool, Part B of Article 5, is standing here ready for us to take action, appropriate legal action, to face the federal government and say you've gone too far.
Time is short.
And time is short. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, to that point, if you don't mind, a number of states refused to ratify the Constitution, including New York, was one of the most outspoken one because there was no Bill of Rights. And Madison had already been drafting a Bill of Rights and had even wanted to incorporate some of them in the original draft of the Constitution. And so isn't it interesting that now even our Bill of Rights is under attack by certain people within our country who would like to either take away some of those rights or reverse some of those rights. So we have a lot to fight for, not only Article 5, but even our first 10 amendments to our Constitution is under attack these days.
Agreed. And Representative Fincham?
Yes, ma'am. I find it interesting to note that in the most recent Supreme Court opinion dealing with IRDC, the court held that the people are the legislature. Interesting, coming from a court that so often reinforces the idea that the federal government is all powerful. So it's interesting to me that it is the people who have reserved those powers not enumerated for the federal government or even for the state government for that matter. It is the people who have retained those rights, and they are the ones who are calling for this to happen. So I think it's right and proper that the people who are the legislature at a very basic level are making this call. So thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Fincham, any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, sir.
Would Mr. Tom Steele come forward? Mr. Steele, will you please identify yourself for the record, and you'll be given a liberal 2 minutes.
Tom Steele, Yavapai County, Prescott Valley, Arizona. Madam Chair, distinguished legislators, I'll be 78 years old in May, and I came late to politics. I was involved in political groups when I was in my 20s and 30s because that's where the girls were. We threw the nice parties. But come along, I don't know, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, and so forth, I started getting more interested in actual politics itself. And listened to talk radio and a few other places. And I'm reminded of a professor emeritus, I believe from George Mason University. I can't think of his name. I can picture him. But he said, well, ladies and gentlemen, he says, we threw the British off because of taxation without representation. So how do you like the taxation with representation now? And we haven't seen any improvement that I can detect. And so I began reading the Constitution and reading. I have 2 books on letters written back and forth by the founders to each other, as well as the notes from the convention of 1787. And let's remember that between the Declaration of Independence, we had 11 years where George Washington and others virtually ended their life trying to raise money for the wars because there was no mandatory method for the Articles of Confederation to support a war, among other things. So our 13 colonies got together, and although there were no parties back then either, right? There were those that supported a stronger federal government than those that didn't. But the issue became, we have to do something, but we fear, they all pretty much feared too much power for a centralized government. And that reminds me of the 17th Amendment, which we have lost, which would allow the states to elect, through their legislatures, elect our U.S. senators. And I don't want to mention Mr. Juan McCain's name, but I did. So anyhow, there's many things that we need to do. And if we focus on the fact that the states created the federal government, and thanks to Mr. Mason, we have that option of the states, which I believe was added maybe within a couple weeks before the end of the convention, that we have that right, that we can enter into an amendment to the Constitution, preparing amendments only for the ratification of the 50 states, of which we need 38 to do that. And I think we can say that our federal government is not going to prepare any amendments to our Constitution that's going to restrict their right to power. And I'm not talking about Democrats, I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats. They seem to want the power that has been taken away from we the people. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom, and I would speak to that. I've been going since 2013 to the Assembly of State Legislatures. And the interesting thing about that is it keeps growing each time we meet, more and more Democrats coming, joining, agreeing with us that this is something that needs to be done. And so you're right, it's not a partisan issue, this is a states' rights issue. And there's Democrats across the country who recognize that their votes on whatever they pass have no meaning if the federal government just steamrolls right over the top of them. And so they want to also regain states' rights so that in the blue states that they are also, regardless of who the president is, that they have that right to govern beyond the enumerated powers, that those are the states' rights. And so it is, as you say, a nonpartisan issue, and Democrats are right on board with us moving forward
More and
towards
more.
this.
Yes.
Representative Thorpe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you very much for your presentation and your thoughts. And I would suggest, echoing one of your comments a moment ago, 200 years ago we were saying no taxation without representation. I would say no taxation without respiration. That we, it's kitschy and all, but it's absolutely true. How can we be borrowing money for exorbitant spending today that future generations that aren't even born yet will be obligated to repay? Is that criminal behavior or what? And I would agree with some of the naysayers who do not appreciate Article 5 like we do, that yes, we do need to reform Congress. And we need to ensure that good people are there, and we need to ensure that they're only there for a short period of time, because the longer they're there, the more they become part of the system. And so part of Convention of the States is we need to create term limits so that we don't have members that are staying in Congress, in the House, or in the Senate for 20, 30, 40 years.
Regardless of their party.
Regardless of their party. Absolutely. Thank you.
Members, anyone else have a question? Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr.
Yes, Mr. Steele and Mr. Sinyard, we need you to fill out these request to speak forms. Have you done that? Okay, well, if you would do that, they're right there, because we have to log you in, and so, did Mr. Sinyard get one? Okay, yes, sir. Fill that out, and just whenever you bring it up to the afterwards the desk, and we'll log you in. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. James Pickerman to come up and speak against this HCR resolution. Sir, please come forward to the podium, identify yourself, and you'll be given a generous 2 minutes.
A generous 2 minutes, huh?
Yes, sir, we're not using the word liberal here.
Yeah. Thank you. I noticed
I'm sorry about that.
I've had to chop everything down here, but I would just like to say that what we assume about the process, it may not be, all the things may not be true. First of all, I'd like to say I hope that we all have a reverence for our Constitution, and I do. And I'm not against Article 5. We have the first part of Article 5 telling us that Congress can initiate. Well, we've done that. And I suppose all of you wouldn't say that even though it was following the Constitution, that it was a wise thing to do, especially 16th, 17th, and perhaps the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments were sloppily done, and there's question as to whether they were legitimate. And so it isn't the amendment process, it's the failure to follow the Constitution. And there are some assumptions that we have, just to clear the air, the first assumption is that the Congress calling the convention for proposing amendments is a simple act and that the states preset the rules. Now, in 1983, we almost had enough to do it. We had about, two or three states short. And I was a member of the John Birch Society at that time. And they went around and they made it so that many of states rescinded. But anyway, this is why Congress got together all of a sudden, because they thought it might happen. They said that the Constitutional Research Services reported, and they actually had 41 bills for helping them in their role of calling, according to the necessary and proper clause of the enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. And the Congressional Research Services reported in 1983 that Congress has not, in general, embraced the theory that its role is purely ministerial or clerical. And once a convention has been called, on the contrary, it has traditionally asserted broad and substantive power authority over the full range of an Article 5 convention's procedure and institutional aspects from start to finish, including determining the number on selection process for its delegates and the formula for allocation of votes among the states. And so they are going to be involved in the last one I'll mention is the assumption that convention for processing amendments can be cut short. In other words, can be, I should say, controlled. And they're not free to decide what they wish. On the contrary, the simple wording of Article 5 says that they will be able to propose amendments. They are the ones who propose them. And this is under the laws of nature and of nature's God. They are the people at that point, once they've been called. Madison refers to this higher authority in Federalist Paper number 40. He says that he refers to the transcendent right of the people to abolish and alter their governments as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And we fear, and fear is a good thing if it's properly placed, that since this body will be under the laws of nature's God, just like the 1787 was, that we have to fear what they'll come up with on their own, not being controlled according to the plain and simple language of Article 5. Thank you. That's all I have to, that isn't all I have to say, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkerman.
Any questions?
Members, any questions? Representative Thorpe.
Madam Chair, Mr. Pinkerman, you've testified before us before, and I just wanted to thank you and some of the other folks that are here with you, that you would take the time and come before us again. I appreciate you taking the time, because we certainly need an engaged, active group of citizens in our nation, especially to keep tabs on elected officials.
We need to understand both sides seriously, and thank you,
Yes.
Senator Thorpe, for that.
Well, you
For the
just
compliment.
you just gave me a raise, Madam Chair, Representative Thorpe.
Yes,
But no, I just had a couple quick comments for you. Declaration of Independence, of course, talks about there comes a time when a people might choose to change their government, and we certainly had that a couple hundred years ago. And I hope that we don't. I think Article 5 really helps us from hitting that precipice again. That we have the power and the authority to check an out of control federal government through Article 5, as opposed to
the convention does.
as opposed to well, no, the people do, as opposed to dissolving our government. And Madam Chair, the states, I truly feel that we haven't been doing our job as far as using
Oh, yeah.
legal means to push back against the federal government when they do not abide by our Constitution. So it's up to the states and the people to use the courts to fight back when our federal government is out of control. Madam Chair, if you go back and read the day-to-day notes from Congress, even Harry Reid in the 1990s was speaking in favor of a balanced budget amendment proposal. And that's one thing that Congress does, is they don't want to give away their authority to propose amendments to the Constitution. So when they saw what happened in the late 80s, that the states were getting close to having that authority, they stepped in to propose their own amendment to try to stop the states from doing it. And then lastly, Madam Chair and Mr. Pinkerman, there are folks in this very room that fear a runaway convention, and I totally get that. But that's never happened in our nation's history. 40, 50 conventions have occurred, and it's never happened. And so it's hypothesizing that it could possibly happen. But what we have right now is a runaway Congress, and we have an out-of-control federal government, and that's a reality. And so I'm a supporter of Article 5 because I see the reality of a runaway Congress that we need to put in check.
Thank you, Representative Thorpe. And Mr. Vice Chair has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Two questions for you, sir. You mentioned that one of the fears you had would be that the Congress, after the convention was called, would start getting heavily involved, setting rules, interfering. Could you kind of elaborate on that? And my second question is, and maybe this should be the first one, is do you think that the closer an Article 5 convention actually came, the more imminent it was, that the Congress would react to that and in a positive way to maybe, start enacting legislation that would be favorable to the aims of the convention?
I feel personally that Congress may very well be hostile to the whole thing. That's why this is in here, in the Constitution, to force them to do it. But they will take, I feel, every chance they can get, as I've quoted here from the Congressional Research Services, and I have other quotes which I won't do, but they will throw as many roadblocks toward their side as they can, I'm sure. Congress will do this. But this is why I feel that the convention itself is to deliberate, like Mr. Nadelson says of the Goldwater Institute. It has the power to deliberate. Never mind what you think, you want to curtail it in and make sure that it can only do that. It is the deliberating. It is there to propose the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Pinkerman, for coming.
Thank you, sir.
Is Mr. F. Thomas Feidler? Did I pronounce that right, sir?
Used to it.
If you would please identify yourself for the record, sir, and you'll be given a generous 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tom Fiedler. It's actually German for fiddler, so you say fiddler with a German accent, you got it. And I'm a constituent of this legislature living in Legislative District 24, speaking in behalf of myself. First of all, I want to thank you all of you, for serving as, I should have addressed you, Madam Chair, and committee members, and legislators. I want to thank you all for doing this. It's pretty much a thankless job. And even though I come to argue against some of the things you're trying to do, I'm sure glad you're here trying to do it. This state is a wonderful state to live in because of all of you, both parties. I thank you very much. Now, Arizona's Constitution amplifies what we read in the Declaration of Independence, namely Article 2, Section 2 states in part, this is Arizona's Constitution, all political powers inherent in the people and governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. My presence here today is to give this committee notice that I do not consent to the Arizona House of Representatives applying for an Article 5 convention. The sponsors and supporters of HRC 2010 share my alarm at federal usurpation of Arizona's sovereign and retained authority. All three branches of the government of the federal government usurp Arizona's authority. The Congress takes the powers retained for our state when it legislates unfunded mandates outside the delegated powers of Article 1, Section 8, and Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution. The executive bureaucracy burdens the Arizona state with rules without our consent or input, which has been mentioned by others who have testified here. Federal courts rubber stamp these usurpations of the other two branches and make them constitutional by legal precedents. So we have a sitting constitutional convention in the Supreme Court that keeps amending our Constitution without our consent. But these usurpations are committed in spite of the Constitution, not because of it. Our founders, the original 13 states, delegated enumerated powers to the federal government, retaining those not enumerated to themselves and to us as citizens. The U.S. Constitution is a limiting document. Powers not given in that Constitution to the federal government are denied to it. All constitutional amendments, unless they repeal delegated authority, potentially give state authority away to the national government. That is why I resist highly this, I would call it the nuclear option. I believe that the state has more authority by exercising its authority, sometimes at risk of being sued by the federal government. When the state government asserts its own authority, that's how it exercises it. Authority not exercised is surrendered. And so when people ask, if not now, when? I believe when will be when the states stop accepting federal money. Here's the rub. With a fiat monetary system, the federal government can spend money before it collects it.
Sir, you have one more minute.
Okay. Thank you. That's very generous. So we have a system now where we spend and tax rather than tax and spend. And until that, and that is not constitutional. Having a fiat currency is not constitutional. Until we address the tendency of the states to balance their budgets their state budgets with federal money, amending the Constitution will do no good and may do harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiedler. Members.
Madam Chair, you don't mind if I speak to you?
Oh.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. And first and foremost, I'll start by saying I absolutely 100% agree with you that the states have kind of made a deal with the devil when we accept federal dollars. And we need to wean ourselves from doing that completely. Because what does the federal government do? It entices us with money and then says, oh, by the way, here are the strings that are attached that we need, the fiery hoops we need to jump through. So I agree with you completely. And Madam Chair, couple quick points. We're a representative form of government at the state level, at the national level. The people you elect represent your wishes. And so it's your obligation as a citizen to ensure that you do your best to elect good people. And when those good people do not do the things you want them to do everything in your power to unelect those folks and replace them with good people. So certainly that's the way our system works. And Madam Chair, we're elected. And the very first thing as a freshman, and every 2 years when we come back, the very first thing we do is the head of our Supreme Court has us repeat an oath. We swear an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the U.S. Constitution. So I'm sitting here today, Madam Chair, trying my very best to fulfill that oath. And I'm not going to follow my Constitution partially. I'm going to follow my Constitution to the best of my knowledge and ability fully, which includes Article 5, a tool that was given to us by our framers, you know, there was no condition in the writings of our framers that said, you know, keep this thing in a box and only use it when certain conditions occur. It was meant that the people of Arizona and the people of all the states be engaged in shaping our future.
Okay, and Representative Thorpe, we have 9 more speakers.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much. I do appreciate your comments today.
Thank you, Representative Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Fiedler. Thank you.
Is Mr. Schuler McCorkle? Close. I'm not doing very well today, sir. I'm sorry. Please come forward, identify yourself for the record, and but by the way, we do not have a.
I'll get us.
That's fine. You can fill that out and then turn that in afterwards.
Sir.
Please identify yourself, sir.
Skylar McCorkle, Maricopa County, Chandler, Arizona. Madam Chair and distinguished representatives, I appreciate this time to talk to you about Article 5. I, too, swore an oath to defend and protect the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And right now, I would say the most domestic threat we have is our federal government. And the only way to overcome that is to give the power back to the states. And one of the issues, as these gentlemen brought up, is the fear factor of having an Article 5 convention. As a military officer, I kind of know what fear means, and I wonder what it would have been like back in 1776 when they were trying to fight the Revolutionary War. Their heads were on the block. Now, how much more fear can you get? In that case, we wouldn't be here if they'd given up. So my oath says I'm going to fight for it. I have not rescinded my oath, and I'm going to continue to fight for my Constitution and every bit of the Constitution, including Article 5. And I strongly believe that our only way out of the situation we have right now is to give the power back to the people and back to the states. We've run several mock conventions, and several interesting amendments have come out of those. And one of them was concerning the budget. How great would it be to eliminate the IRS and just let the states collect the taxes? We wouldn't have to worry about how much money we took from the federal government. It would be the other way around. Can we change things that much? Yes. We can do what we feel we need to do as the people and as the states. And the legislature of the states will have a big part in determining how Article 5 is conducted. So I hope and I pray that we'll do something about the mess we have in Washington. And again, when I took that oath, I was neither Republican or Democrat. I was American. And I stand for our Constitution and every bit of it, including Article 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCorkle. And I'd want to make a comment too. I hazard to make this comment, but I'm going to make it. Is that I think it's fair to say that the natives are restless and they're feeling like they're running out of options. But I would contend that this is a very viable option, and that we are not, excuse me, we are not out of legal options to right this ship. So I just want to, excuse me, I want to make a public request that we not give up on the tools that we have. That yes, we're getting close to that place where we don't have much left to do, but this is one very good, viable, legal way to try and address the issues that we face with the federal government. And I thank you for continuing to defend your oath. And I think that Article 5 is a very good, viable way to do it. Members, any comments or questions? Representative Thorpe?
Madam Chair, to that point, I would agree. We have a rich toolbox, and we need to use all the tools that are available to us. And if I can just make one comment, Madam Chair, the British Stamp Act, when that was passed, that was pretty much, I think, the tipping point for the colonists. And you could be put to death if you did not purchase a stamp on your legal documents. So you talk about a runaway government that could actually push you to death because you disobeyed one of their rules. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you, Mr.
I do have two answers, some flyers if you would like them afterwards or whenever, concerning answering the question about how it cannot be a runaway convention. So.
Thank you, Mr. McCorkle.
Thank you, sir. You can hold those, and we'll get them for any members that wants them after this.
And he's signed in his.
Mr. Joseph Crary? Yes, sir. Please step forward and identify yourself, and you'll be given 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Joseph Crary. I'm a multi-generational American, and as an attorney, engineer, and scientist, I deal with facts. So let me throw out a couple of facts for you here. The last part of Article 5 says as follows, that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Portions of Article 6 read, senators and representatives before mentioned shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. Those are facts. It's a well-known sentiment that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. Our founding fathers knew that as our country grew and evolved, our government would evolve as well. And they knew that there would come a day when the American people would be disenfranchised with the government. For that reason, they gave us Article 5. It was a return of government to the people. And could there have been any other reason for that verbiage? The American people are angry. They don't know what to do. This is evidenced by just watching the current political campaigns. No matter what party you represent, just watch the campaigns. There's anger in the American voters. But anger of itself is not enough. The American people need to know that their concerns still matter, and our opportunity is now before us. The democratic process is the backbone of our Constitution. There's never been any evidence that career politicians were even considered by our founding fathers. But by not supporting the Constitution of the United States, our career politicians have in effect voided government of the people, by the people, and for the people. For this reason, I humbly request this committee allow the people of Arizona to voice their concerns and implement changes that will uphold the freedoms envisioned by our founding fathers, so that government of the people, by the people, and for the people will not perish in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crary. Members, any questions or comments? Thank you, sir. Well said.
We have a Mr. John Gordon. And sir, on your request to speak, you did not state whether you support or oppose the House concurrent resolution. Okay, sir. Please step forward, identify yourself for the record, and you'll be given 2 minutes.
My name is John Gordon. I'm a 35-year resident of Arizona. The states created the federal government under our Constitution. And in doing so, though, they had grave concerns that this government, which they expected to be limited to certain obligations, it was a limited government. They were afraid that at some time this government would exceed their authority and become abusive, tyrannical. And so therefore they included Article 5 in the Constitution, which gives the states the ability to correct and rein in a federal government. And in putting in Article 5, they never would have approved this Constitution but for having Article 5 in that Constitution. And also by putting in Article 5, they fully expected their successors in interest, which are you, ladies and gentlemen, to act when the time came under Article 5. They didn't put it in there for dressing. They put it in there to be acted upon. So therefore, I request that you honor their expectations of your predecessors and also your oath under the Constitution to protect and defend the Constitution and begin the process of reining in our federal government by approving HCR 2010. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Members, any comments?
Madam Chair, just a real quick comment. You know, I'm a proud Republican, and there are Republicans in Congress that just, their actions absolutely disgust me. And I'm very frustrated with my party, oftentimes not standing up for constitutional principles. And so I certainly don't look at this as a partisan issue. I look at this as a issue of the possible destruction of our nation, that we need to redevelop that balance between the relationship of the federal government and the states, to have that proper federalism that our founders wanted.
Fully agree. It's not a partisan issue. I mean, the states created the federal government, and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you want to conserve the federalistic system as envisioned by our founders.
Absolutely.
And the way to do it is rein in that federal government now.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gordon. Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Aaron Ellsworth? Is Mr. Ellsworth in the committee room? Okay. How about Mr. Louis Fierro? He has requested to speak, not here. Okay. How about Mr. Alan Wiggle? Okay. How about Miss Jennifer Hirsch? Has requested to speak, not here. Requested to speak is Mr. Ken Zimmerman. Not here. Requested to speak, Mr. Les Santinover. I got one right. Sir, for the record, please identify yourself and you'll be given 2 minutes.
Thank you for the generous 2 minutes. I am Les Satnover, recently retired from corporate retail after 36 years. I mention that because I suspect I see the group behind, and many of these supporters appear to be either my age in the neighborhood, and I see much younger faces in front of me. And I think what I see is the difference in our society, in our culture at large, in the United States of America. This is the most magical country ever. I've worked in Europe. I've worked all across the United States. And I have really come to understand at this point and stage in my life that there has been a radical transformation of our country. It's seditious. It's hidden. There are many forces at work. And I realize that if we don't have more citizenry awareness of what is really taking place and the power of our government and the power to actually usurp parts of our government and then in essence deny all citizenry of the right to freedom and liberty, that we are in a dangerous spot. And I can tell by listening to the committee members that there seems to be general acceptance of the notion that the Article 5 needs to be seriously taken into account. And as a tool, Mr. Thorpe, I do agree, anything and everything in the toolbox needs to be brought to bear to turn the ship around, as Ms. Townsend mentioned. I will say that I don't believe that my children, who are all grown and married, have even read the Constitution. And we are educated. I have a master's degree. As I said, I was a corporate executive. A friend of mine is a COO of one of the largest banks in America. And I can tell you that we were just having dinner 2 days ago, and his comment to me when I tried to even bring up politics was, I don't have the time. I'm so disgusted, I just don't listen to it anymore. People are giving up. It's not just anger. They're giving up. They're unengaged. They're uninvolved. And I really do think that it starts with the educational system, not really educating our youth to the miracle of America and the civic responsibility that we all really bear to be in one way or another, somehow or another, engaged and involved and learn about the government and do what you can to help to make some changes. So I stand before you never ever appearing in anything governmental, legislative ever in my entire life. For the first time I decided I'm going to find out what this is all about, and I'm going to listen to a committee hearing and make my voice heard. I'm one voice, and what we really need to have is a voice of 300 Americans speaking out, 300 million Americans speaking out and really asking the government to start to take responsibility for the loss of liberty that we're now facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sadanover, and you are one of a legion of Americans. You spoke perfectly that would represent them, myself included. I spent most of my career in healthcare, and here I am, and here you are. And so I would say that no, we cannot trust that our education system is going to do the job for us. Clearly it did not. Clearly it did not. And so, as I said earlier, I have had to learn to do it myself, and taking the kids back east for Thanksgiving, on a Thanksgiving tour, not, and doing all the different things that we can do to educate ourselves. Now, I want to take this moment to thank Representative Thorpe, because Representative Thorpe is not a newcomer to this debate. He has been studying this for years and has known about it, has been involved, and so he deserves that proper recognition. And we can thank him, and I also want to thank you. As these years have gone by, that I've gotten involved, more and more and more people know what this is, and it's because of folks like Representative Thorpe. But we now all need to become a Representative Thorpe and really delve into this, really learn what exactly happened then, so that we can implement this now and that we don't repeat or one of you guys said, keep our republic. We need to hang on to it because it is slipping away and people are giving up, and we can't allow that to happen. And the fact that you're standing there shows that it's not the end. We're not completely without recourse.
May I add something? When you hear that our Congress assembles and spends the time that they spend in Washington, D.C., evaluating legislation and passes a 2,442-page omnibus bill, which they have not read, and you come to understand that the regulations that the federal government imposes upon all of the states, almost as much as 4,000 a year, which effectively create law, we are not even legislating anymore in Congress. It's coming out of the courts, and it's coming through committee meetings, and we really need to understand that the government isn't actually doing what it was supposed to do, and the way the original founders envisioned our government pursuing citizen rights.
Well said. Representative, or Mr. Vice Chair, I should say. Go ahead.
Please defer to Mr. Thorpe and then Mr. Fitcham.
You want to go best for last again? Okay. Representative Thorpe.
Madam Chair, he wants to rebut me, probably, so. And thank you very much. Oh, no, actually, you don't need to step down just yet, but, no, I appreciate very much you being here. I appreciate, if you notice, all the folks, whether they're pro or con, on this particular issue are coming with a knowledge of our Constitution and our nation's history, and that's wonderful, and I applaud that, and I appreciate that. And to a comment that you made, there's a terrific book that I've taught the Constitution on called The Original Constitution. You can get it off Amazon, and it's written by Robert Nailson, whose name came up a little bit earlier. And whether you're for an Article 5 or against, this is a terrific book to read. It's not promoting specifically, but it gets into the history of what drove our framers to write the Constitution. And then just to echo a comment that was made, and Madam Chair, was, goodness, we have out-of-control EPA and out-of-control Board of Education, or Department of Education, where through rulemaking, they're creating law. And Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says only Congress has the authority to legislate, to make law. And yet the President, through executive order, is making law. The courts, the Supreme Court, is making law.
It's upside down.
And so we have to use every tool in the toolbox to fight back. Thank you.
Senator Fincham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And until June 17th, 2013, the extent of my political involvement was voting.
Yeah.
So and that was after I too retired. I'm excited to see people that once they transition and can actually spend time to be here instead of out earning a living. I'm excited to see you here, sir. There's one point that I want to make is we've been talking about the federal side of the equation. Just because somebody writes a check doesn't mean you have to cash it. And I think it's incumbent upon the states, particularly Arizona, where we're so stressed over how much money we're able to generate in the form of tax base. We continue to have this vertical conversation around raising taxes to pay for basic services like education, public safety, infrastructure. We have this conversation this way. When we're on an unequal footing with other states that have a very broad tax base. So we essentially have become a welfare state. Other states are paying for our services. So we need to get to the point where we can say, we really appreciate your offer, but I think we'll go this on our own. We'll figure out a way. We don't want to have our contribution to the federal deficit. I think that's the other side of the equation. We need to, as legislators, figure out how we pay for those things that right now we're borrowing money as one of 50 states to pay for and saddling our kids with an insurmountable amount of debt, which is only going to get geometrically worse in the years to come. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Fincham and Mr. Satinover. So my apologies, Mr. Satinover. We had one more thought from the distinguished Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want to say to you, and I want to echo what Mr. Fincham said. I got into politics late in life, and pretty much like you, frustrated. And I would encourage you, sir, really, we need good people to step forward. And all of the people in this audience, so I know several of them, we have a real shortage of candidates, people wanting to get involved. So don't let this be the last time you do this. Whatever party affiliation you have, connect with it and seek out elective office at any level that you're comfortable with. And I really encourage you to do that, as I do all the members that are sitting in here, because we can't function if we don't have decent candidates to step forward. It's hard. We take our lumps. They pay us too much, you know how that goes. So, but you spoke to the heart of the issue, and I would really like to see you personally follow through and contribute more at the elective level if you choose to do that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
wife will be glad to hear that.
To that point, to that point, if you don't seek elected office, seek out kids and educate them. Educate yourself and educate the kids. Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, next speaker.
Madam Chairman, we have we have approximately 7 people that would like to speak for this bill. And if you so choose to have them speak or read their name, that is your call. But just to let you know that we have 7 more to go.
Well, I think members, if we can keep our comments short, and we've said a lot, if we don't repeat it, if we've already said it, then hold your fire on that thing, and let's just see if we can't get through the rest of the speakers, and we want to give everybody opportunity if possible.
Mr. Ronald DeLong, sir, state your name for the record.
Oh.
Oh, that was a head fake.
Good. Is Mr. DeLong in the audience? Okay. Is Joanna Salina Lopez Cervantes in the audience? Okay. Is Mr. Daniel Cassidy? All right. Mr. Russ Hessinger? Okay. And the rest are speak as necessary, and they haven't voiced an indication they want to speak, so that is the list.
Okay, so Madam Secretary, if you will just note the names of who signed in not to speak but for, and then who signed in against but not to speak. Is that okay? All right, members, any final discussion on House Concurrent Resolution 2010? Great, okay. Then Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Representative Fincham.
Vote aye.
Representative Mitchell.
Aye.
Representative Rios.
Madam Chairman, just briefly explaining my vote.
Please do.
I appreciate all the testimony. I had an opportunity just to do, and I am by no means an expert on any of this, so I did a little perusing, and I found that the arguments that a gentleman that I know you all think very highly of are in opposition to this legislation. And this gentleman talks about that we need to follow the Constitution as opposed to trying to fix it. He recognizes that with the Constitutional Convention that there are no guarantees, and you need to, can you assess those potential benefits, and will they outweigh potential costs? His thinking is that you invigorate the American electorate and have them identify and elect a trustworthy group of representatives. If I can just quote him, he says, "I believe that America's salvation lies in 2 places, the people and the states." He goes on to further state, "It isn't necessary to pass one or a few or even many conservative amendments to the Constitution to rehabilitate the American idea. It is more imperative that we have leaders who will be true and faithful to their oaths of office. The American voter must become more vigilant and aggressive against government's ever-increasing encroachments. Americans must seize the moral high ground. We must be good if we are to have good leaders." And so these arguments, to me, just make common sense. And so I find myself agreeing with President Andy Biggs, and for those reasons, I vote no.
Representative Thorpe.
Madam Chair, may I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
The 19th Amendment to the Constitution provided women with the right to vote. Wouldn't it be a horrible shame if that didn't occur because people took the argument, the position, and said, well, instead of changing the Constitution, we should enforce the Constitution, and women never received the right to vote. And so instead, people in the suffrage movement pushed that idea, and we were able to ratify that, giving women the right to vote. And women have such an incredible history in our nation as far as the foundation of our nation, the creation of our nation. They're such amazing contributors, and we can never forget that. And so I believe that whether it's Congress proposing an amendment or the states proposing an amendment, that process is there for a reason, that we can sometimes right wrongs, we can changes in our nation, we can address them. But specifically, we have an out-of-control federal government and that needs to be reined in, and thank God that we have the ability to do so. And Madam Chair, with that, I vote aye.
Representative Velasquez.
Madam Chair, may I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
I just feel compelled to mention to everyone that reached out, phone calls, emails, asking me to support this effort. I do, I heard a lot of opposition and support, and I must go with the constituents in my district who reached out for me to oppose this bill. So with that, I vote no.
Representative Wheeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I explain my vote
Please
briefly?
proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate hearing from you last year, the year before, and again this year. And, I just want to put a different perspective on this for a moment from some of you, not all of you. My belief that this country is strong in many ways, not only militarily and economically, but constitutionally and as a democracy. The sky is not falling. And for over 200 years, we've always had those naysayers who say the sky is falling, we're in trouble. We have troubles, we have challenges, we have this Constitution that we all revere, and that Constitution is the strongest document of freedom on earth that has ever been devised by humanity. I had the luxury and privilege of traveling through Siberia, Russia, and China, and Mongolia earlier last year. And I can tell you that the strength of this country is unparalleled anywhere. The freedoms that we have to stand here in this committee and attack one administration or another, one party or another, and walk away as brothers and sisters in a foxhole facing similar challenges is unlike any place on earth. Our Constitution is strong. Our country is strong. For all the problems and all the debts and all the per capita debt that we have compared to other nations, we're very healthy. But let me give you one last thought that I'd like to leave you with, and that is our ability to bounce back always. In our history, we have faced enormous challenges threatening our very existence, internally and from the external, from foreign threats. 10 to 12 years after the end of World War II, when Tokyo, Berlin, Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Hamburg and Bremen and all these cities in Japan and Germany were completely devastated, when those two economies and those two countries and those two peoples were totally devastated, begging for food, and benefiting from the grandiose beneficiaries of the United States who went to rescue those nations and later became our allies. 12 years after that utter destruction, Japan and Germany became the second and third most powerful economies in the world. We will overcome these problems. And we don't need to offer radical solutions. We need to stick to a constitution that has worked and that is emulated and respected and attempted to be followed in other countries in the world. I am grateful to be a citizen of this country. I will support this Constitution, and I will fight with some of you at all times to make this country better and to strengthen that Constitution. The sky is not falling. We're doing okay. We're going to do much better. We have a lot of challenges. We're going to overcome them.
we are a strong nation, we are one people, and this Constitution binds us and unites us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Wheeler, can you state your vote, please?
Sorry, no.
Representative Campbell.
Madam Chairman, could I explain my vote, please?
Please proceed.
I would like to address my good friend, Representative Wheeler, who I have great respect for. And in some respects, I agree, and in others, I disagree. I think that this country is not strong. I think that the $20 trillion debt facing us is going to wreak havoc when it comes due and is going to pale with the Great Depression. We cannot continue to deficit finance and run the debt up. That is a huge, huge problem that takes strength away from the United States. I think that having legislators who make careers out of the politic body in this country is a great detriment. I've always felt, as the founding fathers felt, that you would serve your community and go home. And if I could make any changes, it would be for term limits and no retirement for these individuals. We need to get citizens involved in this government, and we don't have that. We have a professional elite class that's unresponsive, and you can see in the results of gridlock and debt which way our country is heading. I agree with the gentleman who spoke about fear of the unknown in the Article 5 convention. Yes, there is fear of the unknown. But if we don't step forward and we don't take action, we're going to lose any ability to control the destiny of this country, because I have absolutely no faith in the Congress of the United States doing the right thing, because there's special interests that control them, careerism, and separation from the people of this country. And my last thought is, and I've expressed this before every place I go, I have an old historic home. It's over 100 years old. And it's a well-built home. And it's rock solid in its construction, but it needs to be maintained, and it needs to be aired out, and it needs to be swept clean and get the cobwebs out. And so I'm for opening the windows and letting in the fresh breeze and letting many elements come into my house that will not only make it stronger, but a better house. And for that reason, I support the Article 5 convention, and I vote aye.
Representative Townsend.
And by way of explaining my vote, we talked a lot about the Bill of Rights today. So let's dissect them. We've heard today that the sky's not falling. First Amendment, the right to free speech and the practice of religion. We have seen several times now where so-called free speech zones have been set up for protesters. The only free speech zone that ought to be set up is going to be in the exact shape of the United States. That is the free speech zone. Second Amendment. We just had an executive order. Laws being made by a pen, not by a process. Fourth Amendment. The microphone on this phone, the camera on this phone, at any moment can be accessed and I can be listened to. This is my personal effect. These are my papers. And without a warrant, it can be looked through. I can be watched at any place in my home. I do not feel like I have privacy anymore. And most of us are giving permissions for this. But even if I didn't give permission, this and many other things are being violated. That is my property. And it is not secure, according to the Fourth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment. You can now be held in indefinite detention without a trial. That is a violation of the Fifth Amendment. Posse Comitatus says that our military, which was put together to defend the country from foreign invasion, is now being used is it Northcom, I want to say? Northcom is trained to do military policing with our military. That's just our Fifth Amendment. Our 10th Amendment rights as a state, we have pretty much ceded because we take that federal dollar. And as I've always said, all of you have heard it, as the father would say, as long as you live in my house, under my roof, and I pay the bills, I make the rules. As long as we let them pay our bills, they're going to make the rules, regardless of what the Constitution says. We look back in history, and we talked about George Washington pressing against the will of the people, wanting a Bill of Rights. We look back at our own state, asking to become a state rather than a territory, and we were told no because our petition included women's suffrage, women's right to vote. And President Taft said no. And we had to become a state, and then the first thing we did was allow women right to vote. That's the state versus the federal. It's the state, the people, the local government that gives us our rights. And we have allowed the federal government to completely overshadow us and claim supremacy. The number of bureaucrats that we have given power to. My own organization, the Greater Phoenix Tea Party, was targeted by Lois Lerner. And we had to sue the IRS just to get our 501c4 tax-exempt status because she didn't agree with our political leanings. The fear within of taking on the IRS as an individual, a bureaucracy, for myself and my family, but we did it, and we won, along with several other groups. The sky has already fallen. The Bill of Rights is in shreds. If you think that we're protected by our Bill of Rights, you are sadly deceived. They are completely gone. Try taking a flight and go through TSA. And, and I appreciate the argument that we need to elect good people and we need to enforce the Constitution and all those shiny arguments that make sense. But as we've seen last night, the people feel that we have no other recourse. And I don't agree with that. I think we do have a recourse, and we're discussing it now. But we don't have time to go and elect and hope, because the federal government now is usurping the will of the people, and the federal government, in the beginning, George Washington pushed against a Bill of Rights and referred to Mason as his former friend because he refused to sign it without the Bill of Rights. I don't think it's going to change. It wasn't, when we became a state in 1912, we pushed against the federal government. When they were putting in the Constitution, we pushed against it, and we're doing it now. If the states don't exercise our rights, and our rights are embedded in the Constitution in Part B of Article 5, we really are coming to the end of our choices, our options. And so I think we need to have the courage of the founders, stand up and say, we will do this legally and correctly, the way that an amazing man, George Mason, predicted, and honor him and those alongside of him who argued for us, the people, the state. And with that, I vote aye. And members, by your vote of 5 ayes and 3 nays, you have passed House Concurrent Resolution 2010. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please move the next bill? Where did I put my thing?
Madam Chairman, and real quickly, Mr. Steele, we need to get a request to speak form from you. If you could do that.
And I'd like to thank everybody also who's leaving now for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Do you have a time?
I'd recommend you stay. We have a short bill that's very similar to this one, if you have the time.
Until Mitchell comes back.
No, I don't want to leave it all. I was just
Okay,
saying.
yeah, no, hopefully we can wrap this one up pretty quick.
just get it lined up here.
Oh, okay. Take your time.
Madam Chairman, I move that House Concurrent Resolution 2014 be returned with a due pass recommendation.
Madam Chair, members, good morning. Pursuant to Article 5 of the Constitution, HCR 2014 applies to Congress to call a constitutional convention of the states to propose an amendment that, in the absence of a national emergency, requires the federal government to balance the budget. The resolution covers the same subject matter as outstanding balanced budget applications from 27 other states and is a continuing application until at least 2/3 of the legislatures have made an application on the same subject. And Madam Chair, members, I'm available for questions if you have any.
Members, any questions for staff? Thank you, Mr. Richards. And so we have the sponsor of the bill here, Representative Thorpe. Would you like to speak to your bill?
I would, and I'll try to make it brief. If I can pull up a quote just real quickly, I apologize. Should have had it ready to go. So Abraham Lincoln said, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. My bill matter of fact, is almost identical to a bill that was passed by the Arizona legislature and was standing within the Arizona legislature in the 1980s until it was later rescinded in the early 2000s. So it's nothing new for the Arizona State Legislature to send this petition to Congress. My bill is very much like the one that we just talked about, House Concurrent Resolution 2010. The main difference is it is a single subject. It's only dealing with a balanced budget amendment. 49 of the 50 states all have requirements to have a balanced budget. And the federal government does not. Thomas Jefferson said that, if he could add an amendment to our Constitution, it would be a requirement that the federal government could not borrow money. And so we are now facing almost $19 trillion in debt. As a nation, our federal government is borrowing money like crazy and never really asking the states whether they have the permission to do so. And so it's a pretty straightforward bill, and I would hope that everyone can support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorpe. Okay, so Mr. Vice Chair, you want to call up the first speaker?
Yes. Is Mr. Farrell Quinlan present?
No, he's
left.
He did. Okay. Well, then.
We have a page, go and find it, and then we can continue on.
Farrell Quinlan, he's outside there. Yeah, just see if he's outside.
He's up to speak. Call someone else while we're waiting.
Well,
let's see if he's right outside. If he's not, then we'll go. I think it's okay to go ahead.
Okay.
I'll send him a text.
Okay, let's go with the next speaker.
All right. Mr. Fiddler is here. Yes, sir. Would you please step forward? You requested to speak against the bill. And once again, for the record, identify yourself. And you'll be given a generous 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair and committee members, I still live in LD 24. And I'm still a constituent of this legislative body. I like the motivation of this bill, but I oppose it because as long as the governor has discretionary spending powers over federal funds, the state, and I don't care who the governor is, and I don't care what party he belongs to, state, through the governor's office, has an incentive to balance the state budget with federal money. To have Congress have an amendment that says Congress has to balance the federal budget. Well, they're balancing it now. They balance it with debt. So I know that this is addressed in the bill. The debt is addressed in the bill, not as much as it was last year, but it's still addressed. But I think that first thing we should do, first things first, I think we should amend the state constitution to, if possible, and that probably would have to be us, all of us as citizens, to amend the state constitution to strip that power from the governor, so that the governor does not have sole discretion on the federal funding. And that's it.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Mr. Fiedler.
Mr. James Pinkerman, speaking against the bill, or are you present, sir?
Yes, I am. Little problem there. Thank you, Madam Chair, and respected.
Sir, please identify yourself.
My name is Jim Pinkerman, and I am opposed to this method of getting us back on the track, so to speak, as a nation. And we the people, of course, everybody knows that we have helped abuse that, the Constitution, and we the people are still clinging to those abusive constitutional violations by refusing to get about federal monies. Governors and legislators, we're all guilty. And we've gotten ourselves in many years in some real deep water. We've got ourselves to a point of a government which is taking on Marxist powers, socialistic, tyrannical powers, well befitting any of the tyrants of the 20th century, getting closer to it. So now we are in deeper trouble of losing our freedom than many of us realize. We're in deeper trouble. We have a cadre of people who really want us from the left wing to have that constitutional convention. And I have literature later for anybody who's interested in seeing that. The left and the right are both going after this for their own purposes. And we must realize this. Now, the three bulwarks against the tyranny that we are facing is our failure to support the bulwarks already in place. Number one, failure to abide by the 10th Amendment's inspired balance. Number two, failure to honestly stay within the budgetary balance of Article 1, Section 8, which is the enumerated powers that Congress is divinely limited to. And number three, an honest system of gold and silver coin money, according to Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, mandates for each state that always buys the gold and silver coin, always buys virtually the same amount year after year, century after century, and even millennium after millennium, without losing to inflation as our Federal Reserve System. It's a debt system. Now, this is why do any of the amendments proposals, I'm speaking particularly of the amendment coming up called the Balanced Budget Amendment, which will be handled later. Does it address these factors? No, it does not address these factors. But do we even need an amendment for these? No, we don't need an amendment, especially with a constitutional, a convention for proposing amendments that is open-ended according to Article 5. These bulwarks are already in the Constitution. What we need is the bravery and the fortitude to join Arizona together with other states to refuse to go along with these abuses. We do not need another amendment, such as the so-called Balanced Budget Amendment especially, and not to open it to a convention for proposing amendments, which will have the power to actually change the Constitution according to Madison, which we have read before. It'll have the power of the laws of nature's God to make any changes it wants. And I have read the balanced budget, which isn't on the table this morning, but it's leading up to it. And it's amazing that a lawyer could put this together, especially one who used to be with the constitutional arm of one of our institutes, the Goldwater Institute. But then it's also takes, I think to myself, it takes a lawyer to do this. It does not address the real problems that we're in. So I suggest that we get busy on promoting the only thing that will pull us out of this with freedom, and certainly a convention for deliberating on amendments will not. Thank you.
Members, any comments and questions? Representative Thorpe.
Just very briefly, Madam Chair. The gentleman who helped craft this bill is Robert Nelson, Professor Robert Nelson. He's not associated with the Goldwater Institute at all.
Formerly.
And no, never. He's never been with Goldwater. And just a point of information, he was a constitutional professor in Montana, and he's currently with the Independent Institute in Colorado. And he's actually had some of his legal opinions argued before the Supreme Court. He's an amazing jurist. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nadelson is the one who said that the idea that we can control this amendments convention is open to legal challenge. It's not there in Article 5.
And thank you, Mr. Pinkelman. And he has most recently, in my recollection, and just this year, has said that he has reversed his position and regrets saying that and does no longer stand by that. So,
okay.
So he has reversed. But thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Pinkelman. Okay, do we have any other folks signed in? Do we have others that are listed? Okay, so Mr. Quinlan will not be able to come and testify, but we would just add for the record that he is signed in to speak if necessary for the bill. And then are there any others that you want to list, or should we just have is there so many that we should just have her noted? Yeah. So we're going to just have the secretary note those who are signed in to speak, or not to speak, but are for or against the bill. And with that, I'm going to ask Madam Secretary to please call a roll.
Representative Fincham.
How about aye?
Representative Mitchell.
Aye.
Representative Rios. Representative Thorpe.
Aye.
Representative Velasquez.
No.
Representative Wheeler.
Madam Chair, may I briefly explain my vote again?
Please do.
Madam Chair, let's balance the budget as President Bill Clinton did. I agree. Let's do it by voting the rascals out of Congress, and with that, I vote no.
Representative Campbell.
May I explain my vote, Madam Chairman?
Please proceed.
I have to concur with the piercing logic of Representative Wheeler. I mean, and I agree a whole 100% with that. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening, and that there is the dilemma, because we can't do that change. It doesn't happen, and the country slides greater and greater into chaos and debt, and I think that's why this movement has such a impetus to it, because we realize that we're coming to the precipice here, and I believe that. I'm not an alarmist or anything like that. I'm a very conservative person. I try to plan for my future and save as much money as possible. But the way this country, the trajectory it's on, we need to do something. You know, there was an old saying: "Do something, do anything, kill somebody." You know, I mean,
not that. Strike that from the record.
That's an old military saying, and I So the point I'm saying is, so even if we did this radical experiment with the Article 5 to try to amend the Constitution, could we be any worse than the situation we're in right now? I doubt it. I think only we could get better, and I hope. And with that, I vote aye.
Representative Townsend.
Thank you. And by way of explaining my vote, I'm going to actually offer you a challenge. And if you'll recall the most recent large Powerball jackpot that we had 2 weeks ago, I think it was now, go home and see if your calculator will even go up into the trillions. But if it will, I think you can do it on the computer and it works. Divide the debt by that number of that jackpot. And how many Powerball jackpots like that would we need to have to settle the debt? And you will be astonished to see what that is. And it's kind of a little perspective there of how deeply we are in debt. And with that, I vote aye. Members, with 5 ayes and 3 nays, you have passed House Concurrent Resolution 2014. And with that, the House Committee on Federalism and States' Rights is adjourned.